Hello, my name is Pijanowski, and I want to welcome everyone to our first webinar, the Transforming Learning with Technology series. Today we'll be talking about iPads, and I'm joined today by Joe DeMaio, who will be serving as the moderator. I'm going to be sharing my screen most of the time, as well as sharing an iPad. I have one right here, which is the one that many of the participants should have received. It's an iPad Air 2. So as I mentioned, this is called Managing the Digital Classroom with iPads. So again, my name is Pijanowski, and I'm joined by Joe DeMaio. So today we're going to be covering several different areas. We'll be going over the iPad for a little bit, as well as settings, storage, and software updates, some built-in features for personalization, apps, professional learning, as well as the activities and exit ticket if you are interested in earning professional development points for participating. So first we have the overview. And if you are participating in this initiative, you should have received an iPad Air 2. I also want to note that at every single slide, in addition to the presenter slide, you will see notes on the bottom. And the bottom notes have more links to give you more information about the resources that we're providing. Okay, so here I'm going to be projecting my iPad, and you should see the home screen right here. And right now I have it on the lock screen. So if I go ahead and slide to the right, you'll see various apps that are there. And these are what we would call the native or the built-in iOS apps. So almost everyone's screen should automatically look like this. You might also notice that I have some on here that are new and they're considered non-native apps in that case. We're going to be going over some of these apps so that you can see how you can make this device more personal for your use. It's also really important to note, if we go right into our settings right here, every single person here should have an iPad that has 16 gigabytes of storage. And you can check that if you go to the General and the About section. And there you'll see on there that it says capacity. So the capacity is 12.0 gigabytes. The number is actually smaller because I have things on here already that it's making it get smaller. So if you wanted to customize your iPad in any way, the settings is a really good place to start. And I really do like to direct people to the general side because here, that's where you can check out things like accessibility, just how much storage you're using right away. This is where you can also set restrictions and check out keyboards and whatnot. So I'm going to go right into the general again and show you, first of all, the background app refresh. So if you go right here into where it says background app refresh, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to click on that. It will show you all the different apps that are listed that I have essentially downloaded. So these are the ones that are not really native to Apple as much. And you notice here that some of them have the green swiped over. So generally when we see the green there, that means that if our app is open or if it's hanging out somewhere in the background, then it's running. That can also drain your battery. This doesn't matter as much on iPads as it does on phones, but it's really important to note that, especially if you're trying to save battery for an extended period of time. If you want to self-select different ones, then you can just go ahead and tap on a button, or you can go ahead and tap on the one that says background app refresh, which actually turns them all off. But in this case, because I don't have very many, I'm just going to leave them on. So let's go back to general. Okay, I also want to show you the storage and iCloud usage part. And the reason why this is really important, because I said again that there's only 16 gigabytes, we really want to make sure that we have enough space because we're going to have so many apps that we put on here as well as data, so we want to manage that. So you can see right now I've used 2 gigabytes and there's 9.7 available, and that's kind of quick. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the manage storage piece, and you can see what is taking up the most data. By now, that honor belongs to Google Docs, but pretty soon that might be something like the Notes app or camera or photos, because that tends to take up a lot of data pretty quickly. So you can go there and manage that and click on each one and see just how much it's using. So I really encourage you to monitor that as you use the devices. Another piece that's really, really critical is to think about software updates. Now, Joe and I had a long discussion about this, and what's really important to note, if you check out software updates, it'll tell you if you're running the latest software or if you are not. So in this case, my particular iPad is running iOS 9. I can actually check that in the About section. It tells me here its version is 9.3.2. Now, you can absolutely manually update the device, but if you're going to do that, where you click on download and install, we really suggest that you do that overnight and you do not do a whole bunch of iPads at once. And the reason for that is because it can slow down your network. Alternatively, we are going to automatically update all the apps. Joe will take care of that from central office. So if you're someone who's like, well, I don't really want to manually update it, you can certainly have it automatically updated. In software really does have to do with just it being an easier and better device to use. Another thing, which I'll get into later, is when it comes to accessibility, Apple is always improving its accessibility features. And if you have a student population of students with disabilities, then you absolutely want to make sure that you update it so that you can give them increased and better access. So that's what we have to say about software updates. Another thing to note, you might be saying, well, I want to customize my device. I don't want my students to have access to certain apps. So, you may not be quite sure what those are, but I'll go ahead and show you the restrictions. Right now, it's turned off. That's the way it is on all the devices. We can absolutely turn off certain ones if you feel like you don't want your students to have access to it, and we really are going to take care of that at the central office, because it can get complicated if there's just too much going on. So think a little bit about that, and we'll talk with you. If you have any questions about that, we ask you to specifically reach out to the help desk. So we went over some of the general information and the software updates, but two other things that I think would be very good tips for you to know relate specifically to the display brightness and to the Wi-Fi. So let's start with the Wi-Fi. The Wi-Fi is really easy. We have one network that we have created so that all of the iPads in this program will have access to the internet. And that network specifically is BPS shared dev, meaning shared devices. So that's the one that you want to use, and that's the one I'm using right now. As far as the display and brightness goes, this again gets back into the whole personalization piece. I personally don't like when screens are too bright because it's really hard for me to read when it's really bright. So if you have a learner who needs that customization, there are two ways that you can do that. The first one, you go into your settings where it says display and brightness. And you can see the slider right here where I can adjust that. You can also turn on auto brightness, where it just does it for you automatically. You can also adjust some things in here with night shift, just makes it a little bit darker. You can adjust the text size, which a lot of people like. I've noticed that some people prefer for it to be larger because it's just easier to read. And you can also decide if you want it to be bold text. Now this is going to restart your iPad, so I'm going to say no in this case. Another way to do it, especially if you don't want to come into your settings, let's say, for example, that I'm just on the home screen. I want to adjust the brightness right away. I would take my finger, just one single finger, go to the bottom of the iPad, and swipe up. And you'll see on there the control center. And the control center allows you to perform very quick actions. And that's where you can toggle for the Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, the do not disturb, which is the little moon sign, the mute on and off. And then of course you have the brightness right here. That's pretty easy to see. So down there in the control center is a nice quick way to get to customizing your device. The next thing I want to cover are apps. Now I'm going to spend a little bit of time with that because the apps are really, really important for us to be able to give our learners access to different opportunities and resources. So if you look here in my presenter notes section, I provide you a little bit more information about the apps. And let's begin first with the native ones. Now we are running iOS 9. I told you that software updates are really critical. They're also very critical when you have your apps, because in iOS 9, the apps stay here. So I can't delete them. If you take one finger and you press it down on the screen, you'll notice that the apps are shaking. Now there's no X button to delete them. The ones that are non-native, meaning they do not come with iOS, are the ones with the little X's. With iOS 10, which is the newer software, you can actually delete even the native apps. So that's something to keep in mind, especially if you see someone there that you're like, I don't want that. Like Find Friends or Tips. On my personal device, I've deleted those. So that's really where the big difference comes between the software. If you would like to download apps that you don't see on here, and I'm sure many of you want to do that, we are not having you go to the App Store or the iTunes Store, which you're very familiar with. Instead, we are having you go to self-service, and that is the little sideways square with 4 different colors. If I go ahead and hit that, right now on my device, I see several different categories of apps. This is going to grow, and it will also look different for each school. So you can see free and paid apps on here, and these are just some of them that we've selected. Now, if you don't see an app that you want on here, there's a process that you have to go through so you can request apps. And that process specifically involves the volume purchase program, which is for education. You might notice on my screen below the little cat is an icon that says volume purchase. I'm going to go ahead and just tap on that. I just added this to my home screen. And essentially, it's just a link to a web page that says volume purchase program for education. So generally, we go into the App Store or the iTunes Store and we type in the app that we want. Well, you're going to type it in here instead. So I can just go ahead and just type something like Lexia. You know, Lexia is a popular one that many of our schools use. And you notice here I have several different options. So you would choose the one that you want after you've investigated it a little bit. And you would fill out all this information and then give it to us. I'm going to direct you to my desktop screen really quickly so you can see the form that you need to fill out once you've identified the app. It's this web page here that says iPad app and book request. So I decided that I want Lexia. I go ahead and just type Lexia. And I fill out all this information here. It's pretty easy to go through. And then once you fill out this form, submit it for each app that you want, we will get back to you right away and let you know when you can download it from the self-service. Everything that you need related to this, you can find inside of our slideshow. Especially if you go to the section that says non-native apps. It has all the information that you need right there. One of the things that the form asks you to do is to locate the asset tag. Now you notice that, of course, we have covers. So one quick way to look for it is actually by going to the home screen. And if you look at the bottom, very, very bottom, sorry, it's not the home screen, it's the lock screen. So if you go to the very, very bottom, you'll see information on there that says property of Boston Public Schools, a phone number, and then you have the asset tag. So that's the information you would fill out as part of your form. So it's in the very, very bottom. Now, there are various teachers who've approached me and said, hey, so I have students who are in special ed and they're in K1. And I have to tell you that, I'm not a K1 teacher, but there are different ways you can get app recommendations. And one of those top ways is to check out Common Sense Media. They have various apps and ratings by parents and teachers. So you can certainly check out to see what they have there. And you can even filter it by ages, content area. So right now I clicked on apps and then I selected Go. And you notice on the left side that there are different filters that you can apply as you search. Different subjects there, skill levels, topics, more ways to browse. So I would definitely encourage you to check that out. You can, of course, reach out to some of us in BPS Technologies because some of us do have experience with apps. It all depends on the app and the purpose of it because we do want to make meaningful choices when we use our apps. Another thing you can do, especially since we're all part of the workplace group together, is to just ask your colleagues, hey, I'm looking for this. Do you have any recommendations? And they can offer those to you. And to conclude on the apps discussion, this is a quick tip that might shock some of you. So I'm going to go ahead and show you my screen again. So right here, you see that I'm still in Safari on the Common Sense webpage. If I take my finger and double click on the button, you'll see a whole bunch of apps that are open right now. And I can just swipe and I'll see that a whole bunch are open, like I have reminders, I have docs, I have notes, mail, settings, Safari, and all that. You might have seen the action of taking your finger and swiping up to close an app. Some people falsely believe that saves battery. It does not. What that action does, swiping up, is actually force quitting an app. And you generally want to do that if the app is not being responsive. For example, if you're getting that, the spinning ball of death, the rainbow one, well, this one would be gray. So if you're getting that, you want to force quit the app. That is the only circumstance in which you will want to actually swipe up and close an app. Not because you're trying to save battery on any iOS device, whether it's an iPad or an iPhone. Tell your friends. So next, I want to share with you a little bit about built-in features for personalization. And I think this is what makes the iPad so exciting as a device. And what you can explore further are things like the keyboard and languages, accessibility, orientation, and some apps like Camera, Notes, and Safari. So first I'll start with the keyboard and accessibility. I'm going to go over this very briefly. So if we go into our settings, in general, maybe scroll down to find keyboard. This is where you can determine if you want to have more languages in here. And by default, it has English and emoji. But I can add a new one in here, like, let's say Spanish, for example. I'm just going to go ahead and choose Spanish from Mexico. That's another option. And then we have accessibility. Now, I mentioned that it gets better with each new update. So some of the ones that I think are really awesome to check out are speech. So I'm going to go ahead and click on speech. There's a selection here called Speak Screen. And this is essentially text-to-speech. So I turned it off. I'm going to turn it back on. And you can customize the voices, to have it sound different depending on what the learner needs. And a quick way to access that, it tells you right here, to take 2 fingers and swipe down from the top of the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and do that.
Speak selection off. A speak button will appear when you select text. Speak screen on.
So it started reading it for me. Now it is text to speech, but the disadvantage of it is that it doesn't actually highlight as it goes along. So it's almost like it's just an audiobook because you're listening to it, but you're not seeing it and listening to it at the same time. So anyway, that feature is really, really good, especially if you're using something like Safari and you're on a website. And I'm just going to say Time for Kids, for example. I actually went to Time for Kids and I wanted to have it read to me. Now there's a lot going on the page. So in addition to the speak selection, I've also customized it so that I can reduce ad clutter. And this is a problem, so I would encourage you to use this. So if you look up in the top left corner, there's these 3 lines that are next to the book, and that is the reader view. So that's how I got my screen to look like that. Now I'm going to go ahead and try the speak selection with this.
Swipe down with 2 fingers from the top of the screen to hear the content of the screen. Voices, speaking rate, speak.
Let's try that again.
Celebrating Women's History. Every March, the country celebrates the accomplishments of women in American history, even though these
Okay, so I just stopped it. Now the turtle means you wanted to speak slower, and the rabbit means you wanted to speak faster. So definitely check that out if you have a chance. You can also customize when you're in Safari just how big you want the font to be and the type of font. So I can go ahead and select Georgia and just switch it so that the background has more contrast. So this is really, really nice. Now this doesn't happen with every single website, so you might find that it may work better with news sites and not with other ones that have a lot of formatting. Some other accessibility features to check out may include switch control or subtitles and captioning. You can turn that on automatically. On my personal device, I always have that on so I don't have to remind it each time. And you can even use guided access for learning. Now, I've never personally used this, but it is really valuable for reducing the amount of distractions that a student might have. Okay, so we have several different apps on here that are native apps that I definitely think are worth checking out, and they connect to our activities and to some professional learning that you might be interested in doing. And those apps are the camera, photo booth, and notes. I'm just going to go into notes really quickly. So if you go in notes, you can actually create a note. For example, I just created one right now. And it allows me to do things like scribble in there, take a picture, and you can take a photo of something that's in the room and use it. You can also type in there if you like. So Notes are a really nice way. I feel like this Notes app has gotten more UDL as it's been updated. And of course, there's the camera, and you can do all sorts of fun things, like you can have the time lapse, slow motion, video, photo, square, and panoramic. I'm just going to do the square really quickly of iPads that are in the room. You know, it's really important to monitor this, especially if you're not going to have that much space. And we really encourage you to actually upload your photos to Google Drive so that if you want to keep them, you know, you can upload them there and then delete them from the device. Right now, I've made a little folder right here that says Google, and I placed all the apps in there so that they'd be nicely organized. Now, how I did that, I just took my finger and I pressed it down onto this screen onto one of the apps, and then I just had an app touch another app, and then it creates that folder for me automatically, and I can title it any way I like. So I'm just making one right now, calling this creativity. And then when I'm done, I just push the home button and it saves it for me. So this is a really good way to organize your apps, especially if you feel like you have a whole bunch. Like if you have content-specific apps, or you might have apps that are specific for a student. Like maybe Bobby has his own little folder and Joey has another folder. You can choose to do that if you wish. You can even place them in different areas on the screen if you feel like that'll be easier for students to get to. For example, I feel like Google is something I use all the time, so I want it to be on the bottom. Go ahead and do that. And put ones I don't use in folders together. All right. So I've got that all set there, and I've customized my device a little bit. If you are interested in future professional learning, there are different opportunities for you. Now, for example, we've done a webinar today. And this webinar has just given you some tips and some ways that you can use your device, but you probably want to learn more than just from this. Some ways you can do that are by participating in chats on Twitter with Apple for Education, including with Apple Distinguished Educators who are part of this global network. There are people in Singapore, Australia, the United States. You can attend free workshops at the Apple Store. Your students can even attend free Apple camps and go on field trips. I heard that there's new ones coming along, and I believe that some of these camps are in the summer as well. And that's really exciting because they get to learn GarageBand and some of these creativity tools. Of course, you can crowdsource from colleagues on Workplace. I really encourage you to do that because sometimes your colleagues really are your best resources. And that is also you, in a way, personalizing the way that you want to learn. And then finally, if you want to take that extra step, you can become an Apple teacher. Apple teachers are different than Apple Distinguished Educators. For Apple teachers, you can go to the Apple Education Program and find out a little bit more about how you can do that. I personally became an Apple teacher by going through the program in a couple of hours. You learn about the iPad, you learn about MacBooks, and how you can use them for creative purposes. You can also master specific Apple apps like Pages, Numbers, and Keynote. And then finally, you can show off the fact that you are an Apple educator. The quizzes are about 5 questions, really easy. It's, I believe, multiple choice. So I would definitely encourage you to check that out. And I've given you a screenshot of some of the Apple Teacher topics. You can study for them by checking out these guides. You can find all of them in the iBooks store, and they're all free. I reviewed some of them myself because there were some things about numbers that I wasn't quite sure about, so the guide was really, really helpful. And finally, to wrap everything up, I'm not going to go into detail about the activities, but some of what I showed you today can be applied to the activities that we've designed for you. If you go to this link right here, bit.ly/TLT-webinars-ET, that link will be consistent throughout the whole webinar process, so you can check that out and complete it for every webinar you participate in. And the 3 that I've chosen for you are: 1, making learning visible by using Photo Booth and the camera app to document something in your classroom, have the students have fun with it, and then share it with us in Google. The next activity is an exquisite corpse. So what that is you start with one little design inside of notes, and then you make it into something more elaborate. Like you have students like pass off the device to each other, and they can do all sorts of really cool things in there, like drawing and writing and taking pictures. And you can share that with us afterwards. And finally, if you're like, nah, I'm not interested in those things, I want to do something else, that's fine too. You can choose your own adventure. And if you choose to use apps that are not native to Apple, make sure you go through the volume purchasing program so we can get that for you, because we really do want to make this successful for you and for your students. So that wraps up what I have to say. Thank you so much for attending. If you have any questions, please type them and I will do my best to answer them.